And while they take their seats, I wanted to just get a sense of, from you guys, what you wanted, sort of questions ahead of time, even though we haven't talked yet. So, but what kind of things you're hoping to get out of the panel today? So I have sat in panels many times, and sometimes the panel goes in a different direction than I thought, which could be good or could be not. But I'm just curious what you're all. So just throw out real quick, what are some things you're interested in? How many of you are here because you want to build a career in cinematography? Very good. Some competition coming your way. What do you want to? What are you afraid of the most? Throw it out. Just shout it out. In terms of building a career, not the other stuff. You can save that for later, for your therapist. Shout it out. Who's afraid of going broke? Good. Who's afraid they won't have, you just don't know how to start or how to get, you feel it's like a business you need to get into that you are outside of? Yeah, cool.
How do you start when you're a bit older, you have experience in something else, and you don't want to start as like an assistant per se? Is there a way to like insert yourself?
Are there shortcuts to success? Somebody wants to jump the line. No, I hear you. And that's interesting, actually, in this day and age. I think it's a little different. That's a great question. So, sorry, if you didn't hear, what she was saying was, is there a way, do you have to become an assistant and work your way up a ladder in a way, or can you sort of just get right in at the top?
Networking.
What about networking?
Tips to great networking.
Tips to great networking. As you left a networking session, what would have defined what you thought that it went great? So sorry, as you're imagine leaving a networking session that went great. I'm trying to get a sense of what you mean.
I met someone who was relevant to my career and who I would stay in touch with, and I would follow up with, and eventually we work together, or introduce me to someone else who I could work together with.
Right, right.
It's essentially something that leads to work in a meaningful way.
Ah, okay. A Jedi mind trick. Yeah.
To answer your first question, that like what do we hope to get out of this? Like in the thing, it mentions something like shooting visual situations, doing the nature of some of these documentaries. Like that's always helpful advice because it's like I don't know anyone who's trying to shoot a documentary where it's not a difficult situation to shoot in. So people that have been through kind of the ringer on that already would be
Right.
very valuable advice, you know?
Right. So the question is, how do you shoot in difficult situations? And I think if I would just tweak that a little bit towards the building your career idea, it'd be interesting to talk about how those cinematographers who can work in difficult situations are the ones. I imagine that's a great thing to be able to demonstrate that you can do and talk about. Okay, maybe just one more. Yeah. How to not get pigeonholed. Very interesting. What's one particular pigeonhole you might find yourself in? Reality TV, yeah, okay. Avoid being pigeonholed in reality TV. Great. I think that gives us an excellent sense of what's happening out here, the vibe. I'm just going to ask each of you to introduce yourself, and you were mentioned, each of them said, I don't want to introduce myself. So in terms of building your career, you might want to learn to be able to do that, just a little. No, these guys have already built it. Once you built it, you can be humble again. But just, obviously give us your name, and let's just say how long you've been shooting, generally speaking, and maybe what was the favorite project you worked on?
Okay. Hi, my name is Amitabh Joshi. I've been in New York about 8 years, and my favorite project was probably my first feature doc that I shot, Tashi's Turbine.
Say it again.
Tashi's Turbine.
Tashi.
My name is Nausheen Dadabhoy, and I've been shooting for about 12 years. And my favorite project is not one that I was the main DP on, but I was an additional camera on Journey of 1,000 Miles Peacekeepers. And I think it's relevant to this conversation because it was project that connected me with so many different people that I've been working with, to this day.
I'm Jenni Morello. I guess, I don't know, I came up as an AC, so I guess that sort of counts as shooting because you're also shooting second camera, but it's been about 10 years. My favorite project, I don't know. There's so many projects I've been on that are so, I don't know, everything's kind of great.
That's pretty great.
Now I'm feeling, I don't know how to answer this.
What's the worst one you ever worked on?
I've had some worse. I've had some pretty bad projects that you're like day playing on and you're like not interested or I don't know. I think I tend to work in more human rights things. So if it's something that I'm like have ethical problems with, then that's those are things that are not fun to shoot on, right? If you feel icky while you're filming, then that's not a good thing.
Yeah. I have worked as an editor. I work as an editor largely, and in the very early days of reality TV, I started doing that, and on one particular show, and I was like, no, I'm out. This is just too. I could be doing anything, So, although they will pay you a lot to do the icky stuff, if you're amoral, go for it. Tell you what, let's. I want to show a clip from each of you guys, so I think people will get a better sense of sort of what kind of work. Or these are. Well, you can tell us why you chose this particular clip. So let's start with Amitabh. We'll show Amitabh's clip, and you want to just, is there anything you want to set up about it, or why did you choose this one?
Sure. So this is a short clip from a film that was at DOC NYC last year called A Little Wisdom, and I was not the sole cinematographer on this. Yuki and Paola were all shooters on it too. But I chose this specific moment because it was one of those moments, I think, in documentary that everything aligned. It was just kind of magical. It's something that you can't produce, and I've always just found this moment to be, I don't know, beautiful. So, and says something about the film also and the story. It propels the story forward.
Yeah, I love this. I'm going to show that. That's amazing. That's amazing. So, building your career. What's something? What was a choice you had to make along the road to getting that particular project, for instance?
So that particular project, I was kind of fortunate that I met the director at the School of Visual Arts, and I'm originally from Nepal, and she was doing a project in Nepal, and it just kind of aligned. It was just like, well, this makes sense for me to be part of the project. And so a lot of, I think a lot of the times I don't know, I'm listening to podcasts and listening to other cinematographers and their careers, and you think like, oh, this is their trajectory, and this is how they started off. They started off as an AC for another DP, or, they somehow, I feel like a lot of the stories are they somehow magically land a job, and that's, I don't know, that's always a frustrating thing to hear. It's like, oh, it just happened, and it's not helpful. But I think the advice I would give is like, try to find projects that are something that really you feel passionate about, you want to spend time doing, and is not a chore for you, right? Like I was going back to Nepal, I was going to a location that I knew was going to be beautiful. I care about these kids. I care about, most of these kids are orphan kids that are in these monasteries. And so just from a kind of a social, I was already interested in why these kids end up there and what are their lives like. And so I would say, don't necessarily try to replicate someone else's trajectory. It's very hard. It's, you come from a totally different place, and I would say try to follow kind of the interest you already have and see where that takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that putting, people talk about, well, it's who you know, or networking, or do you have to go to film school, do you not? And for which I would say, well, you don't have to go to film school, but if you do, that's just one place where you're at, an environment you're at. But I think that, would you agree that sort of being able to say to the director or producers, or whoever might be hiring you or wanting to collaborate with you, if you share a passion for their subject, that's golden, right? That's another thing. So putting yourself in that environment is that's a great thing to do. And you talked about pigeonholing. You could find out, well, if you're going to be pigeonholed, get pigeonholed into something you really enjoy. So, Nausheen, do you want to set up your clip?
So I think that there's a few different clips.
Okay.
It's more like a work sample.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's just like really focused on building your career. What does that look like? So it's just like a couple different work samples. And I think I also put my narrative reel on there because that's really, I bounce between both of those worlds. So
Yeah.
So there was actually something after that, but it's fine. We don't have to play it. Okay. That's a doc work sample. But yeah.
I love this sort of the dynamic between narrative or fiction and documentary filmmaking as something I'm always fascinated by, and I'm always more interested in the people who are okay with looking at the other side, if not even actively working in it. I think it brings so much to both. For you as doing a career, how does that work? So let's say most of the people here are interested in documentary filmmaking, but how do you feel about, well, what if you're also interested in narrative? You're showing that's something you can work in both worlds in a way. Do they even feel like totally different worlds?
No, I mean, I think, so like my formal training is in fiction, and that's what I got my MFA in, but really soon after I graduated, I was already working in doc also, and I think it's all storytelling, so obviously you don't really need, I don't think that one makes you not be able to work in the other, and then I think especially from the perspective of camera and lighting, like I feel they both speak to each other in a really good way, and you know, in fiction, people are always like, they really want you to work fast and for no money, and in doc, you have to do that. So it's definitely, you know, like skills you bring from one to the other, and you know, when you, in terms of like prepping and really knowing how to location scout, I think those tools that you bring from fiction like go into doc, so you can go into a space and be like, oh, this is where the camera should go, this is where the light is nice, and I can just like augment that or just use what's there. So they speak to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, you mentioned about, you talked about kind of skills that the people above you, director, producers, are interested in. When you were starting out, you know, I'm sure there were things that you were proud of that you could do and you really wanted to basically show off, you know, like really do well. So what were some of those things that you enjoyed showing off and getting better at?
I think this is something that is a skill that definitely comes from shooting doc, is like just being able to shoot really good handheld and being able to, you know, like follow action, and it, like narrative people love that too. So I think that's definitely something that, that's a skill that I think I can do pretty well. And then I love lighting, so you know, especially when you're like with doc, sometimes it's more challenging to get the gear to light like bigger setups, you know, if it's not just an interview. But that's definitely something that helps with hiring, when you can showcase that you know how to light something.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Jenni, we're going to take a look at your clip. Do you want to set it up in any way?
Sure. I was trying to think of a clip from a film I've shot that would be useful, I guess, in a constructive way of something that I learned. And so this is from a PBS documentary called Made in Boise that actually premiered 2 weeks ago on it opened the Independent Lens season. And you can watch it until today online. I think the streaming probably ends tomorrow. But it was a movie where you'll see in this, but we're following 3 surrogates. So filming births is actually incredibly stressful because you can't fuck it up and you literally only have one chance to get it. So that's
talking
one
about
thing.
The doctor or the cinematographer?
I'm talking about the baby coming out, right? So both.
Right, no retake.
Yeah, lots of things are happening. But this scene, I was actually thinking a lot about like moments from that movie, and we'll watch what this is, and I can talk about it afterwards. But I do feel like it's a scene that has kind of come from my maturity as a cinematographer. That had I shot this. I mean, this scene was shot 3 years ago, but or maybe 2 years ago, if I had shot it maybe 3 years prior to that, I would have probably covered it a little bit differently. And I think, and it still would have been fine, but it's also funny. So comedic timing is also a weirdly hard thing, right? And I find that we're always reading people, and it is important to follow the action, but also you're anticipating what they're going to do and knowing that something is sort of funny and making sure it works, I guess. So we can talk about it after we watch it.
What a loving family. It's beautiful. That was, you're the only camera there, or was there? Yeah, see, that's.
No, it's the only one.
That's an amazing. This is a particular skill that I'm guessing applies more to. I mean, fiction is always, or usually, a single camera, right? But you do multiple takes and things like that. This is an extraordinary example, I feel like, of single camera shooting, and it felt like you were everywhere. Now, some of that comes from different, obviously, different times. But can you talk about what, how did you get to the point of being able to shoot so that it felt like you were everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the style of verite?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to sort of be everywhere. We had filmed 2 births prior to this, so we had 2 cameras actually the first time we ever shot a birth because we were worried about being on the surrogate's face. I think, and it was a vaginal birth, because this was a C-section, I legally wasn't allowed to be in the operating room. So it made it a little bit easier just to have 1 camera. And sometimes I prefer just to be able to do it myself than to have a second camera because I trust myself more. I have great people who have shot second camera for me, but I think in this situation, when you know the characters really well, you can kind of anticipate what they're going to do. Yeah. And we hadn't done a C-section, so it's also weird when you're filming things you've never seen before, right? Like, and the C-section, they're like, you can't roll the whole time. I was like, well, I don't know when the baby, I can't see anything. And I know that they don't want you to do it because the doctors don't want you to sue them. But I mean, like, they're pulling the organs out. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but what happens if people here have never seen it before. But anyway, I guess in that scene, I had ridden like really early in the morning with Sammy, who was a surrogate, and her sister to the hospital. So they were kind of waiting in the waiting room, and then she goes in. And you could only have one of the dads could be in at a time. So that was actually kind of tricky because I'm like, how do you don't want to miss the baby coming out because that's important, but you also want the reaction of the other dad. And Beth, the director, and I had actually talked about this in advance because we knew it was going to happen. And we decided that the shot of the baby was more important for the editing of the film. Because I remember seeing his face was much more emotional, obviously. They cut it. That was from earlier. But I had to make that choice, unfortunately. Yeah. Like, I could have panned over, but he was physically, like, as close to me as Nausheen is, so it wouldn't have worked. Yeah.
Yeah. But interestingly, you had that conversation with the director. A couple sort of 2 sides of the same question. We were talking earlier before the panel about, you guys were talking about how sometimes you're thrown into a shooting situation, usually you're brought in spontaneously or all of a sudden, and you have to go film, and you've had no conversation with the director. And then on other times, like this, sounds like you have a wonderful bond, and you were really part of the storytelling as well as the story making. What, in terms of building your career, I'm guessing that the director who brought you in spontaneously and just said to you, go, you'll be fine, get it, would love to see that you just went in there and did brilliant work, right? But what is it you need to get from them so that they get the best work out of you? What do you need the director to inform you about? And it's different for each situation, but just sort of in general.
I feel like I always start, like, the day in the car, like in the van, asking them, like, what it is they hope to get out of the scenes that we're about to go into, even if it's a project I've been on for a long time. But I mean, the rule applies across the board, right? Because it kind of puts me in their head, because they are trusting us completely. Like, it is 100% up to us of what we're getting, right? And so that kind of helps me prepare for like what it visually. I think my brain has to function in that way of like, okay, you think this thing might happen, this person does this thing, and so I'm already kind of looking and thinking about those things in advance.
Yeah, so I think it's just, again, it's like story. So what's the story? Who are we focusing on? But then I've had projects that I've worked on where like I've actually gotten a shot list. Like in an ideal scenario, this is everything we would get. And so then you're just kind of like ticking boxes in your head, like, okay, I got that, and obviously you're shooting it so that it can be cut together, but.
That's interesting. It's a genuine question. That's actually something you appreciate, getting a shot list? It's not something that's insulting, for instance.
No, I mean, I want to know what's the most interesting thing for them in a scene, and especially if it's something like, like Jenni's scene where like so many things are happening. I would love to know what's the most important thing for you. Yeah, it's interesting because also the very first shot in your reel, was that in Switzerland, a train station in Switzerland? It's like Bern or Lucerne or Zurich. Yeah.
So I have filmed in that same station. That is, I did a documentary about Einstein for the History Channel, and that is the station where Einstein had to make a very difficult decision about whether he would leave his wife and Switzerland and go to Berlin and eventually become the Einstein we know. He didn't know that at the time, or not. Anyway, so I was like immediately noticed that. And on that shoot, so that was the first thing it was the first sort of big thing I've ever sort of directed, and then I would later do the editing. And so I wanted a very experienced cinematographer along so that, I felt much more comfortable. I was like, well, if I don't know what to do, he'll just get it. And Erich Roland was that photographer, if anyone knows. Amazing. Does a lot of stuff for Discovery Channel and things like that. I was so deferential to him that he actually got frustrated at a certain point, which I didn't expect. I was like, I don't want to tell him what to do. Even some very basic scenes. We're going to shoot B-roll. There was a scene that had happened in a church. And, it would be just B-roll to cover interviews. And I said, get whatever you want. And then he was like, no, I want what you want, right? Which is a sort of amazing thing to hear, which speaks also to the whole collaborative effort that I think people need to get into if you're not already there. And certain cinematographers are not there. They may be this is my gig, whatever. So that's really helpful. I mean, to know that you want. Do you feel the same way? What kind of guidance? What's sort of some of the best sort of most helpful notes or guidance that someone has given you before you shoot?
I agree with what they've said, but generally I ask, what is this scene about, and what is that one thing that you want to come away with, and it might happen, it might not happen. I was on a shoot where for a doc where this man, I really hadn't shot anything of this film at all, and I had to go shoot the release of this man out of prison after 21 years, and the director wasn't there, there was a producer, and I really didn't have too much context to the film. So I spoke to the producer about okay, so who are we really focusing on here? And the film is actually about a man who's helped this person come out of prison. And so that was extremely helpful for me because I would have covered that scene entirely covering the man and his family that's waiting for him to be there. But knowing the fact that the story is actually about this other person who's actually helped, pass legislation to allow him to come out of the jail, I knew that I needed that shot of him looking, that moment might, if you just went in and shot the scene, you would have been like, oh, okay, well, this moment's really about this man. He's meeting his kids after 21 years. Let me capture this, which I did get, but I also knew to get a cutaway of the subject, the main subject of the film, watching, this all happening. So really talking about what, if you're coming in this late into the, the shoot or something, they call you the day before, it's knowing what the rest of the story is, I think is very important.
Yeah, yeah. Or even, would you say, another way to say that is the point of view that they, right? Because you can take on a different point of view. Like you were talking about, it's the point of view, in a way, the point of view of the fathers. That was the most, it could have been, like you said, it could have been totally different. It could have been the point of view of the sisters or the surrogate mother or something. Someone asked about networking, which this happens to be this week, or this DOC NYC festival is one of your greatest opportunities, I feel like, for networking. When you were starting out, somewhere along the way, was a networking part of it? Like sometimes we get gigs from people we know, or a teacher we're with, or a friend, or someone we just met, or whatever. But how do you feel about situations where you're networking, and do you have any advice? Or shared trauma, which is fine too. I can give you some of that if you need. What was the first time you did something that was like, wow, this is really a networking thing? Like maybe you were at a festival or a conference or something.
I can talk a little bit about this because
Yeah.
I just moved to New York 3 years ago, and I had been in Pakistan for 5 years before that, and prior to that I'd been in LA. So it's literally coming to the city with no contacts, almost. I'd done this film that you guys didn't get a chance to see the clip of, but it was with two directors. We did this big like final shoot where they all 5 of their characters are going back home. So there were 4 camera people and 4 APs, but that means a giant crew for you to get to know and then keep in touch with, and when those were the only people that I knew in New York, and I hadn't seen any of them in 2 or 3 years, but we'd kept in touch on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm a real believer in social media in terms of networking, because our lives are so chaotic and you're moving around so much that it's hard to get FaceTime with people, but at least you can sort of keep up. And so that's when I moved here, I joined a bunch of different Facebook groups of New York filmmakers, or looking at groups that were for Asian American filmmakers or women of color in documentaries. So trying to find what spaces I would naturally fit into, and then I would just go on there and be like, does somebody want to have coffee with me? Does somebody want to meet me at this bar for from this time to this time? And it was just a good way to introduce myself to a bunch of people at once. And then I relentlessly kept following up with them, and if I had a dry spell, I would shamelessly just be like, I need work. Do you know people? Can you please just keep me on the top of your brain? And then showing up to things like this, even if I didn't have a film, I was at every party I could get into, just trying to, just not even saying here's my card, hire me, just can we get to know each other and see if we're good collaborators?
Yeah, that's excellent. Jenni, you look like you wanted to say something. Well, you look like you'd never wanted to say. No, you don't want to speak about it.
I don't think I have. I mean, it's actually funny you say that, because I was complaining yesterday how I need an intern or a younger person to help me manage my social media accounts, because I'm really bad at it, and I couldn't figure out how to tweet the direct. We were given all of those specific formats for this, and I couldn't figure it out. It was very, very hysterical. But I guess, I mean, for me, I'm also really bad at networking, but I think part of that, now that I'm thinking about it, is also you do work with lots of people, right? And it's all personality based. Yeah. You know if you're going to like someone, and you know if you're going to work well together, because you're working such long days and you're in such thick, intense situations at times, and they become your friends. So I think part of that also is just grabbing coffee with someone because you haven't seen them in a while, reminding people of yourself, or that you're maybe looking for work. It doesn't have to be such a direct, I need work right now, but I do think just like reaching out to like other filmmakers you know or people you've worked with that you haven't seen? Because sometimes you'll go years without seeing people, right?
Yep.
Everyone's busy.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, actually. You're sort of saying that the word networking is intimidating to those of us who find such things intimidating, whereas just keeping in touch with people is part of it. How about you, Amitabh? Do you have any?
Most of the work I've done has been very much through just word of mouth and people I know or some. I went to the School of Visual Arts, like MFA program, and the instructors recommending me for jobs. I'm not good at networking. I just don't have that skill, I feel like.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, actually, I would say I don't either. So maybe to those of you who are more introverted or whatever, I also found that I was able to go from gig to gig. Now, with editing, it's a little bit easier sometimes because the jobs can be longer. When you were starting out, just how, like, was your work, would it have been day work, maybe as long as a week? What would have been an average length, or how long would you go before you had to get the next gig? I imagine for cinematographers, it's a lot more juggling.
I mean, it still is.
Yeah.
I actually, this kind of makes me laugh thinking about this, but like there was a DP I AC'd for it years ago who would always compare our jobs to sort of being like stockbrokers or day traders. Where like, and it's so true because this happened to me recently. I'm like, ugh, you literally have like two people calling you at the same time. They want you to hold the same days. You're like soft holding them, then you don't know if they're going to happen. Then you're booking them, then you don't know what's going to happen, and then you say no to something else, and you basically end up losing all of the jobs. But you're like so stressed out for like 24 hours because you're juggling all of these people, and you're like, how did I get in this position where I'm basically trying to like juggle all of these jobs? And it still happens. It doesn't go away. It's just like the nature of the industry, right? So
Absolutely.
I don't know. I think the industry is also changing. I feel like we're filming things sort of more last minute. So I used to be booked out farther in advance than I am now.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel I also have pretty much gone from one thing to another, and I went by a simple rule, and I can't say I was 100% confident that this would work out, but it has, of like, I'm just going to do really good work here, and I'm going to leave this person with a good impression, so that they will call me again. And when that sense of breaking in actually turned out to be, say, one job you did, you've broken in a way. If that person goes off to make other films and you really made a good impression, you're likely to get called again, because we can certainly say now from our position of, I hire people now, and if there's somebody you trust or you've worked with before, it's like, absolutely, you're going to go with that rather than the new person in most cases. Eventually, I had sort of a circle of, maybe you got this too, eventually you sort of get like a circle of clients, you might even call them. I had sort of 4 or 5 different places that were like, between those, I could pretty much rotate around. Now, you talked about multiple, being in a case where you have multiple offers. Sometimes you have to choose between both of them, or sometimes you're not sure which of those is you're juggling those. I found that to be one of the most stressful and tormenting situations. I mean, literally, I'm embarrassed about it now, but like some of my mentors who are some of the great filmmakers now, I would call them practically crying. Not crying, practically crying. And being, I don't know what to do. How do I choose? There's this one that I really want, and then this other one which would give me good money or whatever. Have you been in any of those situations, and describe how you got through it, how it turned out? Where you had multiple offers that you had to juggle. I
mean, it doesn't go away. I just did this the other day. This is like my constant state of my life. I'm always stressed out. I'm like, I don't know which job to take. Like, okay, obviously, if it's a document, this is different, right? If it's a project that you're the DP on and you care about it, so those always trump everything. It doesn't matter if someone wants to hire me for a commercial and it's going to pay me like millions of dollars a day. You take the project that you care the most about. Those always trump everything else, right? Yeah. But if it's projects where you're filling in I don't know. I think it just depends. Like, is a director someone I've been really wanting to work with, and and is the story really interesting, and do I really care about it, and does it pique my interest, or I don't know. I mean, I am not very good at this, and I feel like I'm always stressed out.
So I have a rule of like 2 of 3 things need to be working. So it's like
Great.
either the money is good, the people are good, or the story is good, or creative, whatever it is.
Yep.
And if only one of those things is working, you don't take that job. Sometimes you can take it if the money is good and you really need it. But
Yep.
for the most part, even that gets really tiring after a while. So it's like 2 of those 3 things have to be working in order for me to take a job.
Yeah, that's really great. I also do that too. I kind of keep score, or I might have, we all have certain things. It's like, what's nice about that is, I think the good lesson there is the intentionality of it. Not letting the, you can be stressed out by the situation and never really choose, and everything might work out great. It might even work out better than you imagine. But if you just let fate choose for you, okay, it may or may not work out. But if you do it with intentionality, I think you also get better at that. You get better at understanding what you're good at. And I think the hardest situation, and I think one thing that I'm sure a lot of people here would like to know about is sometimes the hardest choice is between that one that pays, like the situations, the worst choice I can imagine is a job I'm pretty likely to get that pays really well that I don't want to do. Okay, so it's that good paying thing but low interest, but they really want to know right away, and holding out for that, Sundance type film or DOC NYC type film that this director is making, and she has me on hold, with a number of people, and they keep interviewing people. How long do I wait? Do I turn down this paying thing? What that indicates, by the way, is that low corporate work or big money work is, I think we would all agree, essential to making this a sustainable career. Is that right? For just about all of us, right? Amitabh, you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be on documentary shoot, and maybe you guys are, but for me, it's there are projects that I really love, and they're long-term docs, and I get to work on them. That's great, but they're not primarily the money maker for me. I do a lot of other kind of branded content, corporate, commercial work that kind of pays the bills for me. But I think those circumstances and situations are different for different people.
Yeah, yeah. Are you guys at a position where, I feel fortunate, I've done all of that and had to get over the fear that if I do this, like I did something for Dodge cars, branded content, right, something like that. And at the time I might have thought, oh no, this is what I'm going to wind up doing, is like these, little brand, these little things. And, but if you stick at it, and as long as you keep a certain frequency of doing the projects you want, which may be the lower paying ones, but you kind of work, you don't work your way up linearly like a company in a way, but I feel like you do work your way up, right, in the community and through experience. Is it getting easier for you? You mentioned that you still have some of the problems, but I feel like it must be somewhat easier than the beginning.
I mean, they're not real problems.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm just like, it's just like what Nausheen said. I mean, you know in your gut whether you want to take it. And obviously, I don't do nearly enough like commercial or branded content work, and maybe my accountant would like me to, and it's probably fiscally irresponsible. But I prefer, I don't know, I guess I've been very lucky that I can just consistently work on documentaries. And also because I AC'd and I came up that way too, right? I was always working on films that way. So I think that. But then it's also weird, not that you're getting pigeonholed, but I don't think there's anything wrong with working on commercials, and I think we would all like to do them because sometimes it alleviates some of like the financial stress, right? Yeah. Otherwise, like you're on an airplane like 5 times a week. There is, you are giving up something even to be just working on documentaries.
Yeah,
No, I mean, honestly, say yes to everything because schedules get pushed, things get canceled.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and whatever is supposed to land will.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And another way of thinking about the corporate, let's say, call it corporate work for whatever it is, or I did reality television. I worked at ABC News doing long-form documentaries, things like that too, which is sort of in between. But you can get to, I'm really speaking to those people who find this, because I feel like especially when you're starting out, you can get really distressed about taking those jobs that you know are just jobs. I think you can get to a point where actually you can see that thing, that money, let's say, as paying for me to be able to do these other things. And in a way, even your identity, like if you feel like you do it long enough, maybe you can. It's part of your identity. It's like I don't want to identify myself as just branded content type thing. No disrespect to that, but when I would go do corporate work or whatever, or television, I'd say to myself, well, I started at Maisels Films, who did Verite, right? It was an amazing place. And they had maybe, when I started there, they had 7 or 8 edit rooms. 6 of those were paid work. Anything from commercials to maybe better paid work, but it would be for television or something. And then there was that long documentary they were making. And if you see that, there was some book I read where it said, think about any money you bring in as for your film or for your career. It actually makes it much more pleasant. And if it helps you, you can also, maybe you don't say it out loud, but you can think as you sit in that corporate edit room with all the other edit bays and you say to yourself, well, I'm really just here. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm just here in between. Yeah. When you started out, what was your vision of what you, like the ideal situation of where you would find yourself? And compare that to where you are now. That's not a matter of keeping score. I mean, it's sort of usually where we are now is like someplace we didn't. It was like a totally different thing than we imagined. But when you were, say, with these folks who maybe haven't done a single project or just have done one, what did you really want? Don't be ashamed.
I mean, I wanted to be Roger Deakins, and I still do.
Right on.
But
Roger Deakins, one of the great cinematographers, narrative.
And who also did DOC, too.
Oh,
yeah.
uh-huh.
And I love these guys that are people that straddle both worlds, like Maurice Alberti. There's like a number of, really amazing DPs that do that.
Yeah.
But I think for me, like, especially moving here, literally having almost no career and like 3 years ago and having to start from scratch, and people tell you when you're in film school, like, then the dark period will come and you won't get any work, and it's like that's never going to happen to me, and then it does, and you're like, shit, this is the dark period that they're talking about. And so I think just being able to work as a DP and get paid and make a semi-sustainable living doing that's living the dream.
Right. And I would just clarify, it's you say semi-sustainable, but it is sustainable, right? I mean, it's you at least are sustaining till the next. You have to decide for yourself what means. Like a lot of people say, I just want to get enough to make it to the next gig, and if that's your goal, so I guess intentionality again, I feel like is part of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm directing a film, so that's why it takes up a lot of my time. So I'm not able to shoot as much, and directing is way more costly.
Yeah.
So it's just that's been a real hard struggle. So that's why I'm saying semi-sustainable.
Right. Actually, but you're intentionally and knowingly taking that creative risk, which is important. Like you've decided that the reward you get inside is, as important as money until you have to go to the grocery store. So, Jenny?
I think, yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, having watched so many documentaries and it's weird because I feel like I was trained in cinema verite. So when I was a kid, I don't know, this is really weird, but I always wanted to be a cinematographer, and I don't actually know where it came from because my parents do not work in the arts. I was like obsessed with movies and like narrative films, and I was kind of always watching them, and I did still photography for a long time. And there's something incredibly challenging about verite, which I think is why I haven't had the desire yet to go into the narrative world, but you never say never, right? So maybe I will in 10 years from now. But I like the challenges that verite gives to me, like as a cinematographer. And I also feel with documentaries, and I think that a lot of people can attribute to this too, is like there isn't a reason they can't look really beautiful. So the challenge of shooting a document, like a feature doc, and making it feel like it's a narrative is a lovely like challenge, and also makes me really excited. And I feel I watch a lot of narrative films. I'm like, oh, that is something that I could try that move or bring that into a doc. And being able to try that is actually really fun. And working with directors who are collaborative in that nature is helpful too.
Yeah. Have you gotten asked for one thing I noticed was that you can get work on documentary style projects?
No.
In terms of making your way into narrative, or when you say I want to go to narrative, it's because you want to do it that different.
Yeah, I mean, I have in the last year like had a few people approach me to shoot narrative films, and I think they're always surprised by how candid I am. I'm like, oh, I'm not a narrative DP, but here are some like friends of mine that I really like that are. But I was like, I don't have it, and I think maybe because they want it to look that way, but I just haven't been interested in it yet. So I don't know if I'm confident enough probably either to shoot narrative, but I still just love documentaries. I don't know.
Right.
It's like getting a different master's degree every day. You're like constantly learning something new. And that is just my personality. I always thought I would have a million careers. So I think this is essentially having a million careers because you're embedded in so many different worlds.
Yeah, yeah. I'm interested to problem solve here, live. You, what would be your advice? You're beginning your career as a narrative filmmaker, a narrative cinematographer. What advice would you have to yourself? Somebody just came up to you and said, I want to get it. Nausheen just came to you and said, or better yet, that's too much. You guys, what advice might you have or does anyone have any advice for a budding narrative cinematographer who is extremely experienced and talented in documentary? Should you network?
Sorry, the question is that you're a documentary.
You're a documentary cinematographer.
Yeah.
You're brilliant. You're talented. You speak at DOC NYC, and you want to get one narrative gig. You don't know.
Well, I think she doesn't really want to do it. So if you don't love this,
If you're not committed to it,
yeah,
that's funny.
don't do it.
That's funny. That's funny. I had a funny situation once where I used to do improv comedy with the Upright Citizens Brigade for a long time, in the early days of their theater, and I was a documentary filmmaker, and somehow got wrapped up into Matt Walsh, who's now on Veep and whatever. He wanted to make a documentary style comedy, and so I just like was suddenly doing that, and so that was sort of just a fun way to get in there. But I can totally relate. Do you guys stylistically, how much is there a place where you're like, I can shoot this way, this is how my films look, but I want to get to, like, where is the next, like, you're no longer building your career, you're in it, right? Where do you want, where are you still working towards going?
For me, I mean, as Jenny said, like, I feel most excited and comfortable in cinema verite situations as opposed to things that are just interview driven or somewhere between the line of doc and I don't know, recreations, or I don't know, there's this weird line where I've worked on things where it's not entirely one or the other, and I don't really feel like, oh, I don't know, there's nothing exciting about that because I feel like then everything gets compromised, and I think I don't know, I think just learning to shoot verite well is just a whole lifelong, you could just get better at it, and there really isn't some kind of plateau that you get to, and you're like, oh, I'm the best. I think each situation and circumstance is so different and brings so many challenges. It really is a skill that, you know, you have to keep honing. So.
Yeah. Nausheen, what are certain things you push yourself to get better at?
I mean, I think that I would totally agree with Amitabh. Like, I was at a cinematography retreat a couple weeks ago, and I saw the mentors work, and I was like, oh man, like you know, there's always something more for you to achieve and just get better at your craft. And I think maybe, like, personally now, for the challenge for me is to get on a project earlier so that you have some creative control and you're not just coming in and day playing or, you know, and I think that's probably the logistical challenge that's, you know, that's tougher to manage, especially when projects shoot over the course of years and years sometimes.
Right. Work your way up the creative chain more towards the source of it. And Jenni, how about you? What's something you push yourself to get better at?
I mean, I think similarly to what they both said, I mean, you do have to keep honing it. And I find, I don't know, I'll watch like dailies. I'm like, oh, like, why did I move there, right? Like, it's good to remind yourself of that, because when you're in the moment, sometimes you have so many things that you're doing that you forget. And I think that helps me to remember, like, not to make that mistake again, or like, okay, I almost nailed it that time, but I'll definitely get it the next time. And watching like cinematographers who were my mentors and people that I really appreciate, or like even my peers, I find that I'm constantly like learning from them, because you are, and like the style is still changing and cameras are changing, right?
Yeah. Oh boy.
And that requires you to have to like build it out in a different way so that you can keep shooting the way that is like comfortable for you, but all of these other things are different on it. Yeah,
fantastic. I want to thank all of you for your honesty and your insight. Was this helpful? Did you enjoy having these folks? I agree. And thank you. We want to thank DOC NYC, and I think SVA was sponsored.